Dial tone. Dear Jess, Tijuana, Mexico. Pay phone. Outside Mercado El Popo, 1999. Sound of coins clinking, dialing tones. Aló? ¿Quién habla? Myra. Es Leah? Leah! Dios mío! I can't believe it's you. We've been going crazy here. Your mother comes to my house every day asking if I've heard from you. Where are you? Are you okay? I made it to Tijuana. I'm at a payphone near the market. The phone keeps eating my coins, so I don't have much time. You sound different. Your voice, you sound sick. Are you sick? I'm not sick, Myra. Just tired. So tired. Remember how we used to stay up all night studying for Senora Martinez's chemistry exams? This is different. I haven't really slept in days. Days? Leah, you're scaring me. Everything is scary here. Remember how we used to talk about leaving Venezuela? Making plans in your backyard? Drinking your mother's terrible café con leche? Sound of traffic passing, horns honking. Of course I remember. We were going to be roommates in Miami, get jobs at fancy hotels, maybe even meet Ricky Martin. We had everything figured out. We were so naive, Mayre. So stupid. We thought it would be like the movies. Save some money, buy a plane ticket, start a new life. But the visas, they kept rejecting us. And now you're with the coyotes. Leah, everyone here knows someone who didn't make it. Please come home. Home to what? The markets are empty, Mayra. The hospitals have no medicine. Remember when my little brother got dengue last year? Mama had to trade her wedding ring for antibiotics. I can't watch my family live like that anymore. Warning beep from the phone. Hold on. Need to add more coins. Sound of coins dropping. Myra, I have to tell someone. I can't keep carrying this alone. Tell me what? What happened? The group I'm with. There was this girl. My age, maybe younger. From Guatemala. The coyotes, they made her carry drugs inside her body. Little packets, like grapes. She cried all night before they made her swallow them. Dios mío, that's not even the worst part. There was this woman with us from El Salvador, in her 50s with grandchildren in Los Angeles. She showed us their pictures the first night. She couldn't keep up in the desert. Her legs just gave out. Leah, we left her there, Mayra, under a cactus. She begged us not to go. She promised she'd rest just for an hour, then catch up. I told them I would stay with her. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving her alone. But she grabbed my arm, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "No, mi hija. One death is enough." She made me promise to go. She made me do it. Sound of crying, voice breaking. I had to go, Mayra. I had no option. I had no option. I had to run to catch up with the group. I could hear her praying behind me, her voice getting fainter and fainter. We tried crossing that same night, but there was a massive drug bust happening near the crossing point. Cartel activity, border patrol everywhere, helicopters with searchlights. The coyotes said it was too hot, too risky. We had to turn back. Now we're stuck here in Tijuana, waiting to try again. And all I can think about is how we left her there, alone, with just those pictures of her grandchildren, sounds of street vendors calling out in Spanish. I can barely carry my own jacket now. It weighs more than all our school books combined. Remember how we used to complain about those heavy books? Bitter laugh. What I wouldn't give to be back in that classroom now. You can come back. Please, it's not too late. It is. There's no going back. The desert, it changes you, changes everything. I see things at night when we're trying to sleep, shadows moving. Sometimes I think it's the border patrol, sometimes something worse. The coyotes watch us constantly. One girl tried to run away last week. They caught her. She came back with bruises. She wouldn't explain. Background chatter in Spanish, English, and indigenous languages. Last night, we tried crossing through the river. Everyone said it would be safer than the desert. But there were farmers on the cliffs above the river. Farmers with rifles, Myra. They didn't shout warnings, didn't tell us to go back. They just started shooting. The water, voice breaking. The water turned red. People were screaming, trying to swim back. But the current was so strong. We had to stay underwater, holding our breath, praying they wouldn't see us. A mother lost grip of her baby's hand. I can still hear her screaming, "Por Dios, Leah." Some people just disappeared under the water, never came back up. The farmers just stood there, watching, like they were hunting animals, not watching people die. Human beings, parents, children, dreams. Warning beep from the phone. I keep thinking about what Papa used to say before he died, about America being the land of opportunity. But he never knew about this part. The nightmare you have to survive to reach those opportunities. If they catch me, I've heard stories about the detention centers, but I can't go back, Mayra. There's nothing left in Venezuela. There's your family. There's me. We love you. Love doesn't fill empty stomachs. Can't buy medicine. Can't build a future. The inflation. It's worse now than when I left. My mother's entire month's salary can barely buy a week's groceries. I have to make it, Mayra. I have to. Sound of more coins being inserted. You know what I think about most? Those stupid telenovelas we used to watch after school. Remember how we'd laugh at how dramatic they were? Now I understand. Real life, real desperation. It's more dramatic than any telenovela. Leah, please. You're trembling. I can hear it in your voice. I am. I'm scared all the time. But I'm also angry. Angry that this is what it takes. That we have to risk our lives just for a chance at a decent life. That farmers with rifles get to decide who lives and who dies. Distant police sirens. The coyotes are signaling. We're moving again tonight. Mayra, if something happens to me. No, don't you dare say goodbye. Listen to me. If something happens, tell my mother I understand now. Why she cried when she found out I was leaving. Tell her I'm sorry for the pain I'm causing her, but not for trying. Tell her what she always told us. La esperanza es lo último que se pierde. Hope is the last thing we lose. Leah, please, and Mayra. That night before I left, when we stayed up planning our future, those dreams we shared, keep them. Maybe not Miami, maybe not the fancy hotel jobs, but something better than this. Promise me you'll keep hoping. I promise. But you have to promise to stay alive. I'll try. I have to go. They're waiting. Don't forget me, okay? Never. Leah, wait. Te quiero, Mayre. Maybe next time. Maybe I'll call you from the other side. Sound of coins running out, followed by the click of the phone being hung up. Then a dial tone. I met death last night, being alone in one of London's many streets. I was already cold, but his presence behind me was more than that. It was ice. Sharp, hard ice that seared through my flesh, traveled through my blood, urging goosebumps to shoot out of my skin. When I turned down the lonely alley, I regretted it instantly. It was said that he lingered in dark streets, waiting for a desperate soul to pass him by. But still, I had decided to keep going. Arriving in London on the night of my sister's birthday was already fine, but her party had begun at 8 p.m., and I didn't need to look at my watch to know that it was way past that already. She would kill me for being late. So late. But that wasn't the only reason I dared not turn back. It had been too long since I'd last walked these streets. Since I'd last felt the heavy air of London pressing down on me, clogging my lungs with soot and smoke. Life on the road had made me lighter, more restless. But coming back here was like stepping into a grave. The city had a way of sinking its teeth into you, of making you forget where you'd been and why you'd left. Fearing death was childish. My parents had told me as such when I refused to go on one of the rides at the festival extravaganza during our trip to America. But this was different. Like the images in my mind of falling from great heights and being trampled by horses had cleared, revealing something so impossible that it was the only thing my mind deemed plausible. plausible. He was behind me. I did not turn around. I did not blink. My eyes remained open, forgetting how dry they had become. I just stood there, an invisible force stopping my feet from taking off into a run, from sprinting around corners and through streets until he would inevitably catch me. I wondered what it would feel like. A sudden pain in my chest, a fog corrupting my mind. My vision slowly dimmed until I drifted off into a never-ending, dreamless sleep. Or maybe I would feel nothing. Maybe I would be awake 1 second, thinking of all the ways I was going to die, and the next I would be lying on the ground, waiting for someone to find me. Although by then, it would be too late. No one could ever be saved. The goosebumps grew larger as his presence sauntered towards me, like prey waiting for the predator, knowing that it was neither fast enough nor strong enough to face it. I thought about all those moments I had let slip through my fingers, all those opportunities I had missed out on, all those potential friends, and more that I had hung back from, thinking that I wasn't worth their time. Now, I thought that I should have chosen who was worth my time, for it was going to be shorter than anyone would have expected. And who would have blamed them for thinking I had all the time in the world? I always thought, never did. Always calculated, never acted. Always worried about others, and never spared a thought for myself. Now, just like then, I waited. He was as silent as the night. The once cawing crows and hissing cats were already in mourning. He stood right behind me, dark as a shadow. His breath a gentle breeze against my neck. The single word spoken in a voice rich in charm, alluring me to turn around, to face the predator, but I did not turn around. Still, I did not blink. The feeling in my fingers came back, and I was met with the warmth of coming out of an ice bath into the blazing sun. My feet began to move, the invisible force gone like it was never there. And soon I was running through winding streets, trying to think of anything but what had just happened. I'm late, I thought. I'm so late, and my sister will be mad. I tried to convince myself that was why I was running. Nothing happened. I saw nothing. My breath tore through the night's air as my book struck the slick cobblestones. Gas lamps fought against the choking fog, blinding me. The stray hairs that I had forgotten to shave on my arms stood up as ice invaded my lungs once more. No, please no. I had heard people talk about terror whipping through them, causing them to panic and shake. But that was a lie. Terror didn't come all at once. It came in waves, each one bigger than the last, freezing my lungs and clenching my throat in a vice-like grip. Why did I think that I could outrun him? Why did I think I could outrun the inevitable? I looked down at my pale skirts, now splattered in mud, and refused to look up again. The shock of what I might see would kill me before he did. He made no sound as he approached for the second time. No footsteps, no shift of breath or fabric. Just the sudden, certain sense of him standing before me. Close, too close. My eyes stayed down. I could feel him watching me, the weight of his gaze pressing against my skin like the brush of fingertips. My breath hitched. My fingers curled into the folds of my dress. He said nothing. He did nothing. Just stood there, silent and motionless. The seconds stretched and broke. My pulse thudded in my throat, like the fear in my stomach, mixing with something warmer, darker beneath my ribs. I imagined what his eyes must have been like. Dark, unblinking, tracing the line of my collarbone and the curve of my mouth. Then, just as quietly as he had come, he left for the second time in a single hour. Slowly, cautiously, I dared to lift my head. The street was empty again, mist curling through the dim light. I waited for what might have been seconds or minutes. I didn't know. But I managed to walk again. But I didn't run. I no longer cared that I was late. Finally, I reached it. A tall iron gate, its surface slick with rain that I hadn't realized was falling. A footman in a crisp coat stood at attention beneath a gaslight's feeble glow, his face blank under the brim of his hat. His eyes sharpened when he saw me. Without a word, he pushed the gate open, allowing me to slip through. The moment the gate clicked shut behind me, the street's grim chill seemed to dissolve. A long, white, gravel path wound through manicured gardens, lit by golden candles and strung by iron posts. Tall windows loomed over me as music floated through the air. As soon as I made it into the house, I passed the polished wood and gilded mirrors, up the stairs to the spare bedroom where I flopped onto the well-made bed, ignoring the state of my clothes. Did I feel bad for leaving my sister on her birthday? Of course, but I just couldn't cope with anyone or anything. I didn't think I could even fall asleep, no matter how much my body craved it. I had spent so long moving from place to place, never staying long enough to leave a mark, never bothering to make ties. I told myself it was because I liked the freedom, the open road, the thrill of waking up in a new city with new faces. But the truth was simpler. It was easier not to care when you knew you wouldn't stay long enough to lose anything. I met death last night, and I lived. The night the engines died. The passengers of Flight 227 had just completed their meal. The cabin buzzed quietly with the clinking of silverware, an intermittent laugh, and the faint sound of rustling newspapers. Ordinary, routine sounds that masked behind the fragile facade of safety the horror that loomed just beyond. A stewardess laughed at a joke told by a passenger. A man in first class swirled his wine, enjoying the final sip. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life, its static sibilant as a snake wrapping its way around the unwitting passengers. Then the voice, calm, deliberate, but with an unnatural solemnity, as if the captain was reading his own obituary. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." A moment of silence, just enough time for apprehension to germinate. "I need to inform you of an issue." The words hung in the air, like an executioner's blade, poised to drop. The atmosphere changed instantly, as though an unseen presence had blown a chilly breath over the cabin, permeating every crack and crevice, wrapping around each traveler like invisible fingers clenching into a fist. Talk stalled, laughter died, to be succeeded by tense silence, as though the whole aircraft had sucked in its communal breath. The pilot went on, his voice strained with shame, but shaking under the burden of the nightmare he had created. "In my hurry to leave Charles de Gaulle Airport, I failed to adequately monitor our fuel levels." A long, ragged pause ripped through the intercom, as though he was fighting to get out the words. "I am ashamed to say this. I know I have let you all down." A hollow, uncomfortable silence fell over the cabin, choking the air like an invisible hand squeezing against each chest. The pilot paused to catch his breath before continuing, his voice cracking under the strain. "Since we have been flying for a long time, our destination could be beyond our reach, since we may lack sufficient fuel to get there." The finality of his confession hit the passengers like a physical blow, drawing the air out of the cabin as though the aircraft itself had inhaled a gasp of horror. Some cried out loud, others were paralyzed, their hands clenching armrests so hard that their knuckles whitened, as though through sheer force of will they could halt the unstoppable. A man grasped at his chest, his breathing shallow and fast, the first spasms of fear gripping his heart. The aircraft, once a sanctuary of order and technology, was now a prison of uncertainty. A metal coffin cutting through the emptiness at 500 miles an hour. Every flashing light, every jolt of turbulence seemed to foretell disaster. The whispers of fear were growing louder, building into a jarring buzz of terror. There were no strangers then, just the doomed, held together by the unspoken grasp of fear as they spoored toward some unknown destiny. And then another violent and convulsive shudder that ripped through the aircraft as if it had been seized in a death grip by an invisible hand. One of the engines coughed, sputtered, and died. The whole plane shuddered as if it had been hit by an invisible blow. A jolting crash of bone that threw passengers from their seats and sent loose objects flying through the cabin. The sickening lurch sent drinks crashing, trays falling to the floor, and overhead lockers bursting open, their contents spilling into the aisle. Gasps turned to screams as the cabin tilted, the aircraft going into an unnatural descent. The aircraft had already started to descend to New York, but now it was plummeting, no longer descending in a controlled manner, but spiraling out of control. The cabin lights flickered madly, casting crazed shadows on faces paralyzed with terror. The aircraft lurched violently, its damaged fuselage objecting to the stress. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling like ghostly apparitions, dangling inertly amidst the chaos. The cabin erupted into pandemonium. Screams of abject terror, cries for assistance, the raspy howls of those who recognized the inevitable. The night sky outside, once an endless expanse of stars and silence, now pressed in like the walls of a closing tomb. The vastness had turned suffocating, a cosmic void ready to consume them. Below, the earth was no longer a distant haze, but a giant, looming thing, reaching out to snatch them with an appetite that threatened to consume them. City lights unfurled like streaks of flame, oblivious to the souls above, speeding towards their fate. The altimeter ticked down at a remorseless pace. The aircraft was still too far from New York City, its decreasing altitude a grim countdown without reprieve. There were no longer any alternative airports, no deviations, just the relentless descent and the understanding that hope was running through their fingers like sand in a gale. The cockpit was a maelstrom of confusion, alarms screaming, warning lights flashing like a dying pulse. The aircraft strained against gravity, shuddering so violently the control panels creaked. The first officer's white-knuckled fists held tight to the yoke, his forehead beaded with sweat. His voice, strained and almost lost in the din of automated warnings, sliced through the chaos. The second engine coughed, sputtered, and with a final agonizing splutter, died in silence. A jolting stillness filled the cockpit, broken only by the otherworldly shriek of wind whistling past the fuselage. It was the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, deafening in its absence of power. A stillness that presaged catastrophe. The aircraft, a marvel of controlled engineering, was now reduced to a huge metal husk, a crippled glider flying through the darkness. The control panels blacked out, their frantic warnings muted, as if even the plane itself had given up. The first officer's breath caught. his fists still gripped on the dead yoke, as if sheer willpower could urge power back into the engines. His eyes bulged wide, darting to the altimeter, its numbers free-falling with heart-stopping speed. The first officer's knuckles turned white on the throttle. We're dead stick. No thrust. The captain's mind reeled. We can glide this in. His voice, which he tried to keep steady, trembled. He was not sure. It seemed to take forever for the ram air turbine to deploy. Its little turbine opening up into the howling wind like a desperate, last gasp prayer to the emptiness. Inside the cabin, the flight attendants strode down the aisles with stiff formality, their faces drawn but determined, their voices, strained as they were, carried the authority of rehearsed command. "Brace for impact, please," one of them screamed, her voice hardly cutting through the noise. A few passengers complied at once, throwing themselves forward, arms clasped around their heads. Others were paralyzed, their brains locked in denial, unable to comprehend the unimaginable. One man struggled with his seatbelt, shaking so hard he couldn't locate the buckle. A woman clutched the armrest so hard her fingernails cracked on the plastic. The emergency lights strobed feebly, casting eerie shadows that twitched on faces contorted in terror. People shrieked, a loud, grating cacophony of terror. Some embraced their loved ones. Others slapped hands over their faces, screams muffled by the deafening quiet of the plummeting plane. A flight attendant, holding onto the back of a seat for balance, mouthed frantic reassurances no one heard. The aircraft vibrated heavily, the fuselage complaining in protest to the strain of its powerless plummeting. Unsecured items flew around the cabin, bouncing off chairs and people. Each passing second seemed impossibly long, as if the fabric of time itself had rent asunder under the threat of disaster. The captain gritted his teeth, his hands trembling over the controls. The glide of the plane was erratic, its path a hardly controlled plunge into the emptiness. The cockpit echoed with alarms, relentless, screaming their warnings in a cruel mockery of hope. Smoke from the failing systems wreathed through the dim light, the acrid scent of burning circuits searing his lungs. And then, out of the spinning darkness, out of the turmoil, he saw it, a faint, glimmering glow in the distance, cutting through the blackness like a sliver of salvation. New York City, runway lights, a fragile lifeline quivering in the fog, teasingly distant. But could they reach it? Or was it an illusion, a mirage in the final few seconds before extinction? The first officer's breath caught, his heart racing in his throat, as his eyes locked onto the gleaming light ahead. We might make it, after all. he whispered, his voice trembling with a faint, desperate hope, as though saying the words aloud could make it so. But beneath his words was the unspoken fear, the knowledge that they were still at the mercy of gravity, the wind, and fate itself. But they hadn't reached there yet. The trees rose like shattered black shapes, their gnarled branches reaching out greedily toward the plain, as if to pull it down into nothingness. He had seconds. His grasp of the yoke was vice-like, his knuckles white under the faint glow of the flickering gauges. The plane bucked in an irregular motion that was wild, turbulence and gravity resisting every movement. His heart throbbed in his head, but his mind was fixed in steel-sharp concentration. The first officer took a deep breath. Hold it just a little longer. The branches on top of the trees were closing in. The runway lights continued to flicker ahead, teasingly near, yet impossibly distant. They were on the brink of salvation or doom. One last risk, one last wild maneuver. With a violent tug on the controls, he went for the gap. The tops of the trees scraped the underside of the plane, ripping at the undercarriage. The sound of metal on wood screamed through the cabin, and then a deafening, bone-crushing bang. A merciless cacophony of screaming metal and bursting steel, as if the heavens themselves had fallen. The force of impact vibrated through the fuselage, seats ripped from their mounts, bodies tossed around like dolls, flames licked along the broken edges of the aircraft, illuminating the darkness in an otherworldly, flickering glow. A choking cloud of smoke rolled through the wreckage, its acrid grip tightening around every strangling breath of air. The ground trembled with aftershocks, debris still creaking and groaning in the burning wreckage. Then, silence. A fragile, unnatural silence, shattered only by the crackles of fire and the rough, strained breathing of those who remained alive. There were cries from the rubble, some in the distance, some close, bare with pain and shock. The reek of smoldering petrol clung to the air, a bitter reminder of how close they had come to complete destruction. And when the smoke finally cleared, the twisted remains of the plane lay stretched out like a broken, tortured thing, its bare skeleton scarcely discernible as the great ship that it once was. And yet, despite all the odds, everyone was alive, poised between the salvation and oblivion, balanced on the brink of an impossible second chance. The captain, bruised and inexplicably alive, gaped as he released his harness, his sweat-soaked fingers shaking with aftershock. His ribs throbbed with searing pain, every breath a burning reminder of the savagery they'd just survived. He hauled himself up, vision fading, the metallic flavor of blood in his mouth. The debris lay before him like the scene of a nightmare. Flames licking across scorched metal. The bitter taste of fuel and smoke choking the air. Remote, tortured screams resounded in his mind, together with the ringing that had not stopped since impact. His head reeled, replaying every mistake, every warning he had ignored. The sign of his failure weighed upon him, more oppressive than the wreckage that enclosed him. He had made a mistake that should have killed everyone. Master of puppets. Io sono il padrone, e tu sei il burattino. I am the master, and you are the puppet. Working in an antique store was hardly where Aislinn saw herself 5 years ago. But beggars couldn't be choosers in this economy. Her dreams of becoming someone had been crushed by the reality of life and the collapse of her support system after college, and she depended on this job to make ends meet. Still, something was charming about the Raven's wares, even if she did encounter some characters from time to time. Her cousin often asked her if she had ever felt spirits or weird energy working around the real skulls, the old Victorian dolls, or the taxidermy of the raven that gave the store its name. Like everyone in the town, Aislinn had heard horror stories about the objects sold from this place. A man bought a doll for his daughter, and they all vanished without a trace a week later. A woman bought a pretty ring and died in a freak accident with the ring on her finger. Someone bought an old statue and fell down their stairs. The truth was, Aislinn didn't believe in those sorts of things. Ghosts, ghouls, or energies. Sure, the place was creepy if you worked late alone on long winter nights, but it paid the bills. Those horror stories were coincidences. Plenty of people had purchased items from the Raven's wrath without an issue. Her cousin believed in that side of things so strongly. People whispered about her behind their hands. If Aislinn started believing, what would they say about their family? It was bad enough she worked here. The customers you never heard about were outsiders, a tiny voice in her head would whisper when she had this argument with herself. You've never followed up to check on what happened afterwards. She looked up from her phone when Eli barged their way back through the piles of antique junk piled around the place. A guy dropped off this painting today. I'm telling you, it's weird. Aislinn knew that everything here was weird, in one form or another. She once had someone try to offer a jar of real human teeth. That had been on her second day, and regrettably, it had not been her last strange experience. They jerked their thumb over their shoulder. It's out the back by the rocking horse. I need you to label it up before you leave tonight. Did he give any details? Nah, I'm surprised you didn't see him. Dark-haired guy, glasses, had some sort of accent. She vaguely recalled someone coming in of that description when she'd been restocking some old hardbacks and had directed him towards Eli at the back of the store. She wouldn't have thought of him again, save for the odd look in his dark eyes. I sent him to the back to see you. He had this look in his eyes, like he'd seen things, you know? I offered him a fair price, but he didn't even want the money. He just said to take it. He didn't want money? Iceland repeated slowly. That's a bit weird, don't you think? Maybe it came with bad memories or something. Eli shrugged. Just make sure to get it cataloged to go out on display. I've got to head off. I'll see you tomorrow. The afternoon was quickly fading, the air becoming colder and far less welcoming inside. The eyes of the raven on the desk seemed to watch her every move, and the gentle ticking of the antique clocks suddenly felt ominous. Even the shadows of the shelves seemed to be lengthening, reaching out in her direction. Aishlin looked up from her book and paused. The store had fallen eerily silent. She felt her heartbeat increase as the hair at the back of her neck stood up. Hello? Why was she calling out? There was no one there. No one had entered the shop. The bell above the door had been silent for hours. A faint whisper seemed to be coming from the distance. Someone must have left the radio on in the storage room. She walked to the back of the store, trying to ignore the feeling that the eyes of the dolls were watching her. It wasn't like her to be this paranoid. She pushed the door open wide and reached in to grab the portable radio the manager insisted on keeping around. Her hand found the handle and lifted it out. It was switched off. Okay, she muttered, feeling a cold trickle of sweat run down her back. She set the radio down on an empty stool and worked away around the mountains of antiques to find the latest addition to the collection. Aishlin pulled the sheet off slowly and recoiled. The painting was of a hanging puppet, clearly based on the original Pinocchio story. It's dressed in traditional clothes against a gruesome backdrop of bones and the occasional skull. The entire thing was bordered by a swirling wine-red blood red. A shudder ran down her spine as she took in all the gruesome details. The glass on the front was cracked, but that was hardly anything they couldn't fix. There was something odd about the break, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She turned the painting over to check the back of the frame and noticed a faded name on the back, too illegible to read, and an unmistakable bloody handprint. What the hell? The painting clattered to the floor as she reeled back, banging into a cabinet and screaming as the puppet hanging there swung into her face. Its painted smile seemed twisted into a cruel leer as she swatted it away, clutching at her chest. She took some calming breaths. She picked the painting up from the floor with shaking hands and turned it over, aware of her heart racing in her chest. There's no bloody handprint, only the faded marks of a name. You're going mad, she muttered to herself. You need to get out more. She carried the painting to the desk and started cataloging it, intrigued by the lack of an artist's mark. Even a quick Google search yielded no results, and after a few minutes, she brought it back to sit at the back by the dolls and puppets. She took a moment longer to stare at it, and turned back to the front. There was a rocking horse in the middle of the aisle. No, that wasn't possible. She hadn't moved anything. "Hello?" she called out nervously. "This isn't funny now. Come out." When no one answered, she tried to focus. Maybe it had been there before, and she had simply walked past it, not noticing. Eli had said the painting was out the back by the rocking horse. For a moment, her cousin's voice echoed in her ear. Though she tried to deny it, this was not the first time something like this had happened on her shift. Eli had laughed it off with her at the time, but she hadn't seen a bloody handprint last time. Eli had moved the horse. That's all there was to it. Aishlin walked back to the front of the store and stared out at the street, across at the ordinary sight of the small local shop and the dress shop beside it. Maybe she needed a holiday. The radio started playing a Cure song. Had she turned it on? When had she brought it to the front? Suddenly, the dark shop seemed alien to her. No, now she was being stupid. She didn't believe in any of that stuff. A sudden tiredness overcame her as she sat back in her chair and started to doze, watching the cuckoo bird on the antique clock swing backwards and forwards, swinging, swinging. She could hear the distant creaking sound of a rope and sobbing cries, growing louder and louder. Oh, how painful! How painful! Why wasn't I good? Something was hovering in the corner of her vision. Every instinct in her body screamed at her not to turn and look, to run away from that shadow. She turned her head and saw the puppet from the painting. It raised its head and leered at her. Puppets have no soul, but they do a lot of harm. Suddenly, she was the one battling with the rope as the puppet laughed and screeched over and over. "I want to be real. I want to be real. I want to be real." Aishlin leapt up from her sleep, feeling the phantom rope around her throat. Every item in the shop was facing her. They seemed to be looming towards her, skulls echoing the cries of the horrific voice as it cried out over and over. Whatever sick joke this was, she wasn't playing anymore. She ran to the door and tried to haul it open. It was locked. The room seemed to darken, and the sound of the puppet's voice, distant at first, became unmistakable, growing clearer with each passing second. Its whispers now unmistakably directed at her. "Oh, che male, che male." She picked up a metal poker and walked to where the painting sat. The voice was louder now, its desperate cries in both English and Italian piercing her ears. "What the hell are you?" The voices paused. "You should let me out. You're just like me. You're a puppet too." Aishlin lifted the metal poker above her head. "What are you?" "You should let me out, Aishlin." She tried to move away, but her back smacked into a large cabinet. "What the hell are you?" My last puppet didn't obey. He brought me here. Un burattino che non obbedisce finisce sempre male. A puppet who does not obey always ends badly. You should let me out. I've always been here, waiting for someone to let me out. She realized then what was wrong with the glass. Someone, something, was trying to break free from the inside. Her own reflection in the glass warped into a puppet's face, and she felt the weight of something choking her. No, she was not a puppet. She was a human. This wasn't real. I am the master of puppets. Puppets have no soul, but they do a lot of harm. I tried to take his soul, but he broke free. You will let me out. You are my puppet now. You saw it in the glass. You're like me. Iceland watched in horror as the cracks in the glass grew wider. It will end badly for you if you do not obey. She lifted the poker to swing it, and the hands of the puppets on display reached out and grabbed her throat, pulling her backwards. A bad puppet is of no use to me. I have been waiting for you. There's nothing to be done. One must really die good. Iceland screamed, trying to throw the puppets off. She twisted in their grip, seeing the cracks grow wider and wider. When you're not real, nothing hurts, Iceland. But the more I try to be real, the more I feel pain. Oh, the pain. How painful this is. Can't you feel it? The creaking of the rope was unbearable. The spiraling voice wailing and wailing as she begged for this to stop, for her to wake up, to let this nightmare end. Iceland woke in her chair. The clock read the same time as it had before, but something was different. Everything was different. At some point, the gentle light of the afternoon had faded into a gray gloom bordering on darkness. This day seemed to be lasting an eternity. It was all a nightmare, a terrible nightmare. She saw it then. Her vision narrowed, and her chest tightened as she stared at it. The painting, mocking her from the back, as it always had. Maybe this was still a nightmare taken new form. Those horrible skulls leering at her, that noise, that endless noise. She approached it slowly and ran her hands over the cracks in the glass, feeling her skin crawl with revulsion. The glass was cold, unnaturally cold, like it was sucking the little warmth she had left from her fingers. I want to be real, Aislinn. A voice whispered in her ear, You should let me out. I have waited so long. She grabbed the poker from where it lay on the ground and lifted it, bringing it down to strike the glass. A gloved hand reached out of the frame and snatched hold of her wrist, forcing her to drop the poker in shock. A puppet has no soul, but it can do harm. It cackled, drawing her closer to the frame. You're my puppet now. Your soul is mine. No! She screamed, grabbing at the nearest object, a porcelain bird, and throwing it at the puppet. You aren't real. None of this is real. She felt the world begin to blur and tried to pull away from its grip. But it was too late. This couldn't be it. This couldn't be how this ended for her. This wasn't fair. This wasn't fair. You aren't real. she cried as her mind began to break. You aren't real. She felt the rancid breath of the puppet as it whispered in her ear, and now neither are you.